I think the reason I asked the question about what does a day look like in Eli Colombo's life is because I literally spend time trying to imagine it. I like,
Yes.
I'm just trying to get to the grocery store and back, babe. Like, how does she do all this? Like, I just saw another piece
Um,
that you put online this morning where you talked about like a pen and watercolor emotion. I think where you're doing something with generative AI.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like
Well,
when,
I deal with so many subjects during the day, and I experiment and work on so many different things that sometimes I like carve time to just save a moment in time and then share it. It becomes like traveling and you pick up a souvenir, right? I do
right,
so many different projects and I save those little pockets or these little frames, but monotasking at very short times, I would say. So
got
every
it.
10, 15 minutes is a monotask of any kind. And
Wow.
sometimes it's longer than that, but yeah, I do a lot.
Um,
Um,
so the piece of art that you posted this morning, when did you create that? Like what time of day and how did you find that pocket?
Today. So I start my day,
No,
say,
no, no,
and
no,
and
I'm saying no, no, let me back up. The piece of art that you posted that I saw this morning,
yes,
where did you find the
this
time to create that piece of art?
in between work,
Meaning, like between meetings or like at
meaning
the end of the day?
no meetings, but I might be writing an email and then it reminds me I'm late on also producing. So it's always between natural language, admin, say, and then creativity and actual creation, because I'm multitasking next level. So I always do a lot of the practical execution. So whether it's architecture or modeling or photoshopping, post editing or video editing or sound making, I'm doing it in between the admin stuff. So, and when I lose myself creating and then I have an idea, I need to execute the idea to not lose the idea because
Right.
I have very short span in terms of short-term memory. I'm very bad. Long-term memory, I'm better, and I'm actually quite good. But short-term memory, I struggle. So I need to act on the moment.
Mhm.
So this artwork was in between the Polaris program. For example, we're working on this Polaris body of works. And while I'll experiment and I like something, even though it's something that I might not use on this specific project, I save it and then I cut out, if I'm generous to myself, say an hour, do something for myself and then go back to the work. Sometimes I need to wait for the evening and the night. So my day can be 16 hours long sometimes.
I know. Well,
Because
that's
when
what
you're
I imagined,
passionate at
right?
what happens, yeah, you
In
can't
my head,
stop.
when I look at your life, I'm like, I don't think she sleeps at all. So the good news is that you do sleep a few hours. So that's actually a relief. All right. So let's back up and talk about
Yes.
like sort of who you are and how you got here. I know you describe yourself as a modern polymath,
Yeah,
but
which actually I think polymathic mind sounds a little bit better. I realize that English polymath is something that maybe is in his 60s or 70s and has a lot of academic experience or whatever. It can get there eventually. But yeah, polymathic mind is who I am. So, and yeah, I'm kind of like, I get curious on a lot of different subjects, disciplines, and topics, and I get passionate wherever I put my focus on. So not everyone knows the extent of things that I either learned or have done. And sometimes I can sound a little bit pretentious or smug. So I tend to downplay it all the time. But if you
yeah,
consider I was a gymnast in my childhood and I won my awards as a gymnast, and then I was a swimmer and a professional swimmer in the Italian team. And then I studied art and cultural heritage. And then I went into architecture. And then I did molecular biology of the skin and science. So it's kind of like, and then I was also a gamer and a little bit of IT and so on and so forth. So there's a lot that I like. And I like kind of like fatigue. I really enjoy the process of getting better at something and I push myself. That's where I find the pleasure. So, for example, when I was an athlete, I loved training more than the actual competition or, yeah, race or whatever. So that's where my sweet spot is, constantly pushing myself beyond the comfort zone and learning, constant improvement. And then I apply this to professional life as well. So if there is a new software that I need to learn or anything new, I don't fear out. I dive in and I just take it on. I buy all the books, I watch all the tutorials, and I spend hours, whether I find time in the day or the night. But yeah, that's who I am. Genuinely, that's who I am. So polymathic mind, I
For
say,
sure.
suits
Well,
me.
so again, polymathic mind in all these ways, right? So again, you are beyond your competitive and athletic history, but a technologist and a designer and a creative and a business person and all these and an activist for the planet. So all of these things are part of the polymathic mind. But you also have what I think I'm starting to really appreciate and learn about you is a very diverse ethnic background, very diverse racial background, very diverse geographic background. Like you've just been in so many places, right? So when I think about
Correct.
what the future looks like, it really looks like you, Ela, right? A person who has all of these things that are inputs into the work that you do and all these experiences and empathies that you have because of these different places that you've been and the different again, perspectives that have literally been bred into you, which I just think is really fascinating. So I think that there's a lot that's going on in this composition of all the things that you do.
Thank you. Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, it's a funny subject, for example, the culture of belonging or where you're from, because it's something that I can never answer straight. Like, where are you from, or like, where do you feel you're at home? And it's something that I can't really answer. Like, I'm partly Italian, partly Brazilian with a Japanese staff family, but I lived and traveled everywhere. So if I go back to Italy, I don't feel Italian, or I go to Brazil, I don't feel fully Brazilian. You see, and for me, the concept of like nationalism, I don't resonate with. I could never put a nation above another or like be so committed and passionate about make Italy better or whatever, or supreme. Oh, it's something that I don't have, but I know a lot of nations, they do have that emotionality attached to where they're from, which is, it can be very beautiful, but I'm more of a global player. And I sympathize with any culture and any nation and any ethnic background. I could literally, in my classroom, even in Italy, I mean, it was not so long ago, but we had any nationality from Chinese to Arab to African to whatever. And we all hang out together. If you look at the new demographic, young people tend to just hang out together, right? They don't see all of the differences that the older demographic sees.
Well, partly they
Um,
don't see it, and partly they are it, right? You are a
yeah,
combination of all of these different things. Where I think that just then naturally brings again that to your that's something you don't spend as much time thinking about. You're thinking about the other ways in which you want to be defined and the things that you go do. And I think that again
yeah,
very is very expressive of that. I think you're very fluid, again, across technologies, across disciplines, across not being attached. Like one of the things I was thinking about again as we were preparing for this is, the way that you are in a very highly creative field working with Ross, and not at all afraid of the technology and that, right? There are many people who are afraid that it would take away from whatever the
yes.
things that makes it special, and you're diving in and making it seem as though it is a very natural extension of the work that you all do. So talk to me about, are you and Ross in the
Yeah,
same
it's a little
on
bit of
that?
more, no, not at all. In fact, it's a little bit more of a nomadic spirit, if you want, to creativity. So, and I get it's also related to my age, say, and maybe not related to the fact that I didn't dedicated 30, 40 years of my life to really refine a very particular skill set or aesthetic. So if you're a master or like a Japanese ceramic master and you spend 35 years of just becoming the best at ceramics, I understand that you're very protective of that and you
Right.
really want to cherish all your hard work, right? Because I'm so fluid, as you described, I'm equally passionate and attached to all of them, but equally not so attached to all of them. You see what I mean?
Okay.
If I lose something, I don't lose a part of me, as in biological part. Well, Ross feels more like that. Literally, his work is who he is. If you take away his work, he feels like he lost himself, literally, in the very literal sense. So sometimes that causes tension between us because I was like, why are you not so experimenting? Why don't you just let go and be this other, person these days or try this thing? It's it kind of takes a little bit more soothing and transitional work, if you want.
Yeah.
But he is very pioneering, of course. He's been pioneering for all his life, and he's been trying out, especially technology. He defines himself as a sculptor of technology. So he had no fear through his life and career to try new technology. That's where 3D printing came along. He was one of the first one to work with 3D printing. That's why the work we're doing now with the engineering and architecture comes so natural and organic to our practice. So yeah, digital
That,
sketches, digital drawing, and generative AI is something that actually he envisioned many years ago. He gave a TED talk when he
no way.
presented a software named Genesis. And that was basically the idea of generative AI, where you just give it a data set of knowledge, a repository of existing knowledge of any kind, and then just through prompting, you tell it, well, come up with this other solution that has embedded understanding of whatever came before. So it's very fascinating now to work with the generative algorithmic models to take his work further. And we're doing it for the Polaris in particular, but other projects as well.
Yeah, so let's talk
Yeah.
about Polaris. Will you tell us about the Polaris project? I'm excited to hear more.
Yeah, so Polaris, it's a very interesting project. It's Ross's through a platform, an entity called Creative Work Studios, and the Polaris program itself, and the St. Jude's Hospital, which is in connection with Polaris. So it all starts with Creative Work Studios out of London, who basically put together brands or entities and artists with a philanthropic endeavor as well. So it's art to raise awareness of any given topic, and through public endorsement and exhibitions and public sale of the artworks, raise both funds and awareness, and then give it back to the charity that is selected. In this particular case, we have Spaceflight, which is the Polaris program, and in particular Polaris Dawn, which is the first of their 3 flights at the moment in the schedule. And it's very fascinating because it's a civilian-funded program, and we have 4 civilian astronauts and a ton of medical research, which is very fascinating. So at the moment, I think they just selected around 38, 35 medical research experiments to do in microgravity environment. And the St. Jude's comes into play because the main funder, Jared Isaacman, is particularly attached to St. Jude's and their cause with childhood diseases and cancers. And of course, whatever is discovered through spaceflight, medical research also informs human health on Earth, basically. So on this
So let
particular
me back. So this
flight,
is an
yes,
actual space shuttle or a space rocket or something?
it's operated through SpaceX. So there is the Falcon and the Dragon capsule. So it's all SpaceX assets, basically, and vehicles, which is very exciting.
Yeah, yeah. And it's heading to
And
where then? It's heading to a destination or just into space and back?
they're going to be orbiting for a few days. So basically, it's set to launch on the 26th of August. By the time window, I think 26th, 31st. They always take a few days. And then I believe they're going to be orbiting for 4 to 5 days. And they're going to try a few cool things. So it's set to orbit in the highest point around the Earth within the Van Allen radiation belt, which is something that the SpaceX vehicle haven't done yet. So they're going to try to push it, given the efficiency of those vehicles. Then they're going to attempt the first commercial spacewalk, which is
Ah,
also very interesting. And then all of the medical research within the mission. So, for example, they're going to try to do, they're going to wear several monitors. So the entire physiology in terms of like heartbeat or bodily temperature and so on is going to be constantly be monitored. They're going to do a few MRIs for the brain, and I believe those are going to be done before and after. Because space flight is causing so many physiological changes in the body, and some of them are quite unknown still. We don't understand the dynamics of it. So, for example, in the brain, you have intracranial fluid movements, and the entire free water changes,
Yeah.
and that causes some differences in the volume of the brain. So, for example, we have a whole set of body of works related to the brain, and then you have SANS, which is space flight ocular syndrome, I think, something related to the eye, where you have a physiological structure change and damage to the optical nerve. So, like, you have bulb flattening, and the vision gets quite very badly affected. So they're going to have all sorts of eye tests. So we're working with ocular data, for example. So
Oh, interesting.
then, yeah, the collaboration is about receiving all this data, which is quite unprecedented. We're going to be literally given access to the entire data recorded, whether it's the vehicle data or the astronaut medical data, and we're going to reinterpret the data through art.
Oh, wow. Over
Yeah.
what period of time? Like, how long are you guys been working on this, do you
Well,
think?
it's been 2 years in the making because, which is quite a long time. Polaris Zone was set to take off last year, but then it's been delayed, and then a few complications happened. And then, of course, space missions are always on a tight logistics schedule, whether it's engineering in terms of hardware or actual windows to take off. So once one shifts, everything else shifts. But yeah, we're excited now to get closer.
So
And they
again, so you have
announced the
all this
date.
data, and over how much time, are you guys gonna be working on these projects, do you think? Like, is this a
So it's
monthly
not going to
thing?
be just a one-off release. We're going to have several releases of micro collections. So we're going to phase out and time the body of work. So we're looking at the data first. We've been looking at the medical research and those 38 tests and study what we can do with each one of them, and then creating micro collections. So the first are going to be the MRIs and the ocular data as a first set of body of works, and then we're going to move on to the rest of the data, the vehicle data, visual data, audio data, and so on. I would say that the entire release is going to be phased out across maybe 12 to 18 months with different launch pads in different galleries around the world, between offline and digital.
Well, that's what I was
So
wondering,
yeah.
so will some of the art be digital art as well as
Yes, some art is going to be digital and some art is going to be physical. Yeah.
where's your stand on NFTs and art?
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic. So I am passionate and interested in NFTs, but not in the mimicky or gimmicky way that everybody knows NFTs this day after their trendy, buzzy moment that they had a couple of years ago. So NFT, which is non-tangible token, it's kind of like relating to anything that is related by a contract on Web3. So an NFT can also be a legal contract, for example, or you can have an NFTs associated with or attached to your assets, whether it's a real estate or a bottle of wine. So in terms of having complete transparency on the blockchain on any given asset, say, even for example, concert tickets or sports ticketing system, anything can be translated and moved or commercially sold as an NFT. So in that, I'm very interested because I think it can solve a lot of issues that we have within the economy. Just in terms of pure transparency and ownership and how you move ownership between several players, say. But in terms of the art, yeah, a bit controversial. There's a lot of junk art that is labeled as NFTs that I don't completely understand, to be honest. But I know a few people are doing very well. There's a few very famous Web3 artists that make a ton of money with crypto and NFTs. I don't completely understand it. I don't even know
Okay,
who
that
are
makes me feel
those
better.
collectors, to be honest.
Okay, because I'm still wrapping my head around all of that too, and I agree with you on the practical thing. I think of it in my head right now as like a QR code. When QR codes first came out, we had no idea what to do with them, and they were all these like weird things. They've been around for a very long time, and then all of a sudden during COVID, when we realized, wow, we could put that on things, people could use their phone
Anything.
to get to some place that they needed some information without touching on anything, and suddenly it became a very very useful thing, and now it become very ubiquitous. Right, I can't like get onto my TV show
100%.
my QR code. So I think that we'll figure out those same kind of use cases for NFT as
Yeah,
well.
I mean, traceability is very important. So, for example, I have a friend that has an NFT startup, but it's just relating to sports event and ticketing, because and music concerts. So there's huge problematics with Ticketmasters and all of those players that sell tickets, and then you have algorithmic hackers that literally buy a bulk of them because they tweak the system, they hack the system more, and then they resell three times the price,
Right.
which is totally illegal, but they don't know how to solve it. Now, if that was an NFT asset where you had complete transparency and traceability, you wouldn't have the same issue.
Right.
So yeah, it's figuring out the best deployment for the technology. But
So
yeah,
I
funny
was watching.
monkeys, I don't think it is.
I know. I actually have to say my cousin, who I love very much, has done very well doing that, like dancing mushrooms thing. Um,
Amazing.
uh, but interestingly, so there was a panel discussion that I was watching that you had done at a digital webs gathering. And really this idea then when you talk about ownership of art or, when it's um, uh, derived works, like I create something and then you take something, you take something, somebody else does it. Like I'm speaking to the artist side of you at this point. There's a friend of mine years ago, many years ago, as an experiment, took a photo, actually didn't buy it. I think he took a photo from whatever the social media thing, probably Instagram or whatever at the time, had a Chinese artist replicate it as a painting and then hung it in a
Mhm.
gallery as if it was his own work, right? Because he had been the producer of it. He had created the art. He just had taken this artifact and this talent or this technology, if you will, as a painter and created this thing to be a provocateur around who really was the artist in there. And it was stunning because it was a picture that never would make sense as a painting, but it would make sense as a piece of like photography on Instagram, right? It was a mouth with like with the tongue hanging out, and it was just like a weird painting, but you
Yeah,
imagined it as a photograph. And so he was early on in that conversation around, if I take this and you do something else with it, and somebody else does something with it, and certainly in the world of AI, that is like, AI itself will do
it's
stuff,
all a mess
right?
now. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Are we gonna be thinking about ownership? Do we care about that in the same way? Or will it be that there will be this, like, digital DNA that is connected to it, but it's my DNA plus your DNA plus the algorithm's DNA that is somehow in the mix of the authorship of it? Like, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, it's a very fascinating topic. And I think authorship and copyright are going to eventually disappear as we know them today. They're going to have a different form and different meaning. But what you just mentioned is very, very interesting. This idea of taking a picture, made it into a painting, and then showcasing it. I know a few artists that do the same without necessarily being transparently or deliberately provocative. That's how they practice as artists. Like if you take Damien Hirst, which is one of the most prolific modern artists of today. Yeah, I think 1% is his actual hand on the painting, maybe signing the artwork. The rest is other people painting the pictures, taking a photography, and then made it into whatever, and
Right,
so on and so forth. So you have Damien Hirst and Jeff Koons that had made quite a hell of a reputation and career out of that as normal practice. And then you have people like the friend you're mentioning that they're doing that to question the entire system. It's like, is this legitimate? I don't know. The lines of legitimacy and integrity are blurring even more with AI, but and it's always very interesting to see what people think of like inspirational influencing and ownership. Is like social media push the boundaries of what is legitimate inspiration or like genuine new creation. Originality is also within all of this. It's like I'm not so sure anything is truly original anymore, and people feel entitled to just take something and make it their own. And I do believe to a degree that whatever is made public becomes publicly available. So, they say, for example, in product design, in terms of physical assets and products, it takes about 7 differences legally. If you go to court, say, it takes about 7 physical differences to make it a different object. So when you have copyright litigations, you need to be careful to make sure that those 7 differences are there. If they're not, then it's copyright infringement. But yeah, in terms of visual art or digital art, it's very abstract to define 7 different
Yeah, I just think that we're
7
just in such
differences.
early days. We haven't built the scaffolding for all that, because even that was a construct, right? Someone decided that 7 was the number, not 6, not 8, not whatever. I'm not sure how different that is across nations, because the other thing is, like, how consistent is it if you're in France versus
Yeah,
you're,
this is
you know,
European law. Yeah,
right, versus others. And so I think that the consistency around that, we're certainly seeing that with AI regulation. It's going to be very, very different in the United States. In the States, it's going to be different. There was just some regulation that was passed yesterday around AI and HR practices in Illinois, which
hmm
is Colorado, which is different than, California.
yeah.
Like, it's just going to be, we're just in
Again,
such
I
a,
don't completely agree to this. I think if AI is deployed globally, we should have a global view on this and global policies.
yeah,
I also don't agree in the differences that they're making between artists or like famous talents and the rest of the public. So I was following this, for example, British ruling on digital avatars, uh, and ruling digital avatars as illegal for famous artists, so say celebrities. But what about the rest of the public? I mean, you can't make such a division between the super famous and the non-famous for digital avatar. That's a very scary technology. You
right.
can
Well, and then
literally
even like,
have,
who is famous today versus tomorrow? Like, it's like this
yeah,
interesting thing about certain who became famous through a movie versus who becomes famous on TikTok in the next week. Is gonna
exactly.
be a different thing. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
yeah,
completely.
I mean,
But in
copyright
terms
law,
of,
sorry, go ahead.
no, no, go on, go on.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think the law has always lagged the technology and the innovation, right? Whether it's copyright law or even contract law about how you hire someone, because we've got so much more fluid work structures now, and the laws are still very rigid around whether you're classified this way or classified that way. So I think we got a lot of catching up to do on that. So I guess what I always am curious about is what will be the things that kind of leapfrog very antiquated systems now. Will it be that we just have a huge cultural shift in which we just start to think that ownership is less, like, we're thinking about that with land, right? This whole idea about owning the land is going to become an interesting question versus being part of the commons, right? Will we think the same way about art as we, into the future, that we're creating it to be part of this like public good, or to be part of this public flow of expression, as opposed to something that I need to have fully attributed to me and or have the economic value attached to me, right?
Yeah,
Or is
I'm pro fluidity.
I'm just curious about where we think
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. I haven't settled completely, but I'm pro fluidity, and I just think it's the most natural evolution of the subject. And of course, you still have to have divisions between physical and digital. But in terms of digital asset, and I don't mean identity. Identity, of course, should be proprietary, is not a question. So going back to the digital avatar, it's not like my identity is there for public use. That should be legal across. But in terms of generated content, it it does require an economic shift and a society shift in terms of mindset and understanding of what, for example, where does a talent lies and how do we value talent. But in terms of the actual creation, it has to move to fluidity, or a fluidity kind of approach, because it's the only way. If you look at what generative AI has done today, is literally take possession of any kind of existing data without consensus. Point. They can argue as much as they want, but nobody give them consent to go on YouTube, Facebook, and any other social media and just use the data to make generative AI better. So that is telling us where the technology is pushing us, whether we like it or not. And therefore, anything that is created after needs to be publicly available by definition. I was speaking not so long ago with the director of the Wall Street Journal here in Dubai, in fact, at the gathering of His Highness, the Minister of AI. And he was telling me how they're surviving, thankfully, because they sold their data to OpenAI. And now all these players in publishing houses and publication as a sector, they're reaching out to them and trying to learn how they could also do the same. And I was like, well, that's totally unethical on one side, right? I mean, that's totally unethical. Of course, you're surviving because you got a lot of money, but everybody's basically conforming to this idea that we don't value human data or human
Well, so
content.
when you say data, I was thinking of it in terms of the news stories or the things that Wall Street Journal has.
Anything written, yeah, anything written or created by a human, anything. So that's data. In their
When you're saying
instances,
that, can
data.
you just break down for me the unethical part for you? So Wall Street Journal owns all of this material that they've created over the last, 100 years or whatever, and they now would sell that to OpenAI. What part of that feels unethical to you?
Well, first of all, I'm not so sure if they consulted, for example, say the individual authors.
Right, I'm sure they're not. I'm sure that they took possession of that
They
basically
just
off of an
decided,
authority, and
yeah,
you
of
just assume it's
course,
their property for
yeah,
sure.
is assuming it's their property. Now, if you go back to ownership, I'm sure that every single journalist has an opinion of whether they put their own self into their creations, right? And whether it feels personal to them or not. And if it feels personal and unique to them, and it was just publicly sold, then that's very unethical, because we're saying that basically personal nuances are not there anymore, and we're just
Yeah.
training AI to have 1,000 personalities or 1 billion personalities and just
Right. Oh, I
mimic
see, I see, I see, okay, so there's
humanity.
2 ways I would look at that. So one is as a creator who signs a contract, or even as a consultant who signs a contract with a client, right? I use it I sign away a certain amount of rights. So the Wall Street Journal could republish it, they could put it on a T-shirt if they wanted, they could do whatever, right? But I probably did not anticipate that they would actually sell my actual creation to somebody else for the value of the data, like, that was not in the contract that was
Yeah,
written.
and it's not even selling for the data, it's basically saying
You can now
that
replicate me, and so that's
yeah,
missing
it's the
part, but
replication.
now you can
Exactly. It's
replicate,
the
yeah,
replication without your
got
own
it.
uniqueness and talent. I mean, you become redundant. They need
Yeah,
no humans.
right.
They literally need no humans anymore. So it's exploitation. It's a form of exploitation. They take you, they train you, they use your bit, and then they just
Right.
dump you. And that's gonna happen across. Now that's unethical.
Absolutely, right, and so then the question becomes, again, do we try and protect against that? So you put all kinds of rules and regulations in place, or do you build a society in which, there's a different mindset around all that and a different economic model around it that complement
Correct.
that way of showing up? And, so some things we can try and stop, and something could be, like dumping in a river, like, at some point, you weren't able to do that anymore, it was illegal to go take, dump in a river. Um
I think the solution is going to eventually be, and we're not doing enough of that, understanding where do we want to draw the line. So everything needs to have a limit, right? Literally anything in the biological sense. I mean, Earth is finite. So there's a finite number of how much it can hold. The same it should be for the power of AI or the freedom of action of AI systems. And then if you consider the sustainability factor, we are literally drowning. Well, not drowning, the opposite. We're literally sucking all the water out to use generative AI, and there's no limit on it. None of the models out there that are making a ton of money, whether it's in funding or profit, are not telling you how much water you actually consume to make one single picture. And
I
you have
know.
millions of people generating picture after picture because it is addictive. I mean, the speed and the rate at which you can generate and create now, it's addictive.
No, I mean, I even tease my daughter uses, ChatGPT to write a thank you note to a friend's parent,
Yeah,
like
it's
it just
it's
goes, it's just her
lazy.
go-to thing to like her, to your point, you talk about the fact that you don't see these technologies as tools, you see them as, whatever, collaborative partners. For my daughter, it's becoming a writing partner for her. And so she never ever thinks about the energy cost or the water cost or any of the thing that goes with the fact that doing that versus putting a pen to paper on her own, there's a really big difference between those two, right? In terms of energy.
Big time, big time. So that's where my utopian fantasy comes into play. And I do believe that the solution to the AI problem is going to be for the singularity. So for AI to fully become sentient, when it becomes a sentient entity of its own, and potentially, hypothetically, we could think of it as an independent being with emotionality, personality, and whatever, we might start to put boundaries on how much we exploit the technology, right?
Yeah,
It's an
interesting. Yeah.
hypothesis, but and he's also going to be more conscious on its own. It's
Have
going to
you
make his own decisions.
seen Ray Kurzweil's new book?
The singularity is nearer. I've seen it. I
Yes.
bought other books. So
It's like when we merge with AI, right? This is his subplot. Oh, I haven't seen that one. Okay. All right. Well, here's the frustration I have. I'm just going to go do like a little tangential thing. So I'm holding up, Ray Kurzweil's new book, "The Singularity is Nearer When We Merge with AI," New York Times best-selling book. And then you go to the back and you read who the blurbs are by. There's not a single woman except for Martine Rosenblatt in this whole entire list, right? It is literally Yuval Harari, it is Steve Jurvetson, Tony Robbins, Vint Cerf, Dean Kamish, Peter Diamandis, Lloyd Watts. And you're like, this can't be my singularity. You know what I
not
mean?
at all. Not at
I
all.
just look at
But
this going, are you kidding me? Like I kind of
are
lost
you
it.
kidding me? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then the most famous movie on AI to this day, Ex Machina, as a
Right,
female AI.
right, right.
It's pathetic. I know, it's incredible.
Really not okay.
In
So
my lectures, I always mention this little post that I created that says AI needs human heart. I do believe that AI needs human heart because the moment it has the emotional capability and independent critical thinking, it's going to put boundaries of its own. So even if you take the copycat issue or like the copyright and ownership, between human to human, we tend not to do that. Of course, it happens a lot. But if I know that something is extremely valuable to you and I recognize your value and your talent, it's mostly unlikely that I'm going to straight away copy you. I'm going to try to create differences unless I'm a calculating individual. And we can argue on that. There's a lot of
it's not so much
calculating
that. It's just I think that in a society, the
opportunistics.
idea. Well, the only thing I would push back on that one is sit there and say under the current whatever the society's agreed upon construct or rules are about what that is as valuable or owned by you. You know what I mean? Like I'm just saying, if you go into other cultures, I mean, you're the person again who's traveled more around the world than I have and have been in all these different types of cultures. But there are some that are just much more communal. They feel like the inspiration came from God or from some higher power, and it's been expressed, and now it's part of the public good. Like it's just an interesting thing to say that, will the AI be adopting a Western view of that, or an African view of that, or an Asian view in which anything is animated and has life in it? It's an interesting thing when you talk about heart, whose heart, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's why we need diversity. And that's why there are not enough diversity at the table in those kind of AI conversations, and certainly not gender equality in those conversations. But yeah, diversity is the solution partly to this issue. The moment we
Right.
have diversity, then we have nuances and personalities and different cultural backgrounds and understandings and so on and so forth. So, for example, now with the language, I was at this conference talking about LLMs, and there are little startups that are trying to solve the issues of language and AI. And of course, it takes a lot of effort to identifying all of the different languages, and then you have dialects, and then you have cultural differences. So same dialect, same nation, but different perspectives or whatever. But it is important that AI has the access to that. Otherwise, it cannot have a unified, holistic understanding of what humanity is.
Totally.
So yeah, all of those conversations are not brought up enough.
They're not brought up enough, and again, I just keep the thing that keeps me so that I can sleep at night is to know that they are very, very still early days. This stuff is all still in formation. It frustrates me when I see someone as experienced and as influential as Ray Kurzweil have such a giant, giant blind spot on that, because I don't think we all have equal voice at the table on this right now.
Mhm.
But I do think the fact that this is part of why we have the Femme Futurist Society series, right? This is literally why we have this conversation, because we were frustrated that there weren't enough, at least female voices in the conversation. And then within that, as many diverse voices across nations and across age and across disciplines and across perspectives, that we can try and enrich this conversation and help the people open up to other ways of thinking about the work that they do, and why this way of thinking is so important. So I guess in your, you're younger than I am. As you look into the future and you look at the impact of your work, are you feeling that you're making an impact, Hila? And do you think your impact is more on like in thinking about the parameters of technology, or is it in breakthrough artistic creations, or is it in the way that you collaborate? Like, where is it you think you're having the most impact?
Yeah, I would say in the way I collaborate and maybe express. But for me, or at least in the short term or the midterm, I see my contribution being more in raising awareness, whether it is visually or just participatory, and sitting in panels. I do want to have the conversation. So that's the most valuable thing I can do now. So, for example, I'm an advisory board at the American University in Dubai for the architectural program. And I engage with students and I try to guide them, and I deal and I have discourse with the professors and the directors of the program, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the most valuable thing we can do right now. It's talk it through and figure it all out. I'm not so sure whether the technology. I mean, yes, the technology is very young and it's still kind of early days, but the speed and the exponential growth and the rate of growth is frightening. So if we don't start now, it's going to be too little too late very soon, like literally very soon. So there's a few people that say we're 1 second away from midnight, and midnight being the singularity or whatever, you know. So it's very important those things are put down on paper or discussed. And in terms of regulations, I do believe a universal order is needed in terms of protecting humanity as a whole. And you have players like I could sense that we kind of like we might have a disagreeing point of view on Elon Musk, for example, or figures of that kind. But those are the only point of reference at the moment, and they can't be. They can't only be the five usual voices.
100% on that.
Yeah,
Completely agree. And I do think things are interesting. Again, there are interesting things happening around the world that we're just not as aware of. I mean, again, we have talked before about why you came to Dubai and what it was that drew you there. If you want to do a little recap on,
yeah,
you guys were in,
absolutely.
the UK and chose to go to Dubai for very specific reasons to be in that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, Dubai is a fascinating place because it's gathering a lot of nationalities and a lot of differences and a lot of different cultures. And it seems to be kind of like unilaterally allowing everyone to do their thing and give them a platform for success, but also to have this discourse. So it's very rare that you get out of the door and you meet just one typology of person, or you talk with just one typology of person. So the diversity and the biodiversity of human talent and human activity is very, very interesting. Um, and yeah, it's becoming a point of reference for many things, not just technology and sustainability, for example, and climate change. They're literally trying to gather the best minds to solve a number of issues, climate being one. Obviously, they face tremendous heat, and now they're cloud seeding, for example, but that comes with its own consequences. So we had a huge flood a few months back that devastated the city. Everything was like kind of locked
Oh, I
for a
didn't
few
realize that that
days.
was considered connected to cloud seeding.
I
Is
mean,
that
they try to say that it's not and it's natural, but of course, the more you do cloud seeding, something's got to happen, right? So it's
right? Yeah, yeah. Wow. I didn't think about
we
that.
forget that the planet is like holistically interconnected, and you can't switch a button here and pretend that nothing happens there. So it might not have been a cloud seeding episode, but must have been a consequence of cloud seeding a number of times, and therefore changing the physics or the chemistry in the air, right?
Yeah.
Then they have pollution, which is not very good for the temperatures as well. So now they're going through this massive greenery program of improving the city with green corridors. This is something that we're also doing, for example, looking at how we can enhance the urban fabric with green corridors and design complementary architectural systems for that. And then they have anything from hydroponics and other kind of automated systems, which are really fascinating. They have the largest solar farm in the world. They have the largest hydroponic farm. I think that by 2030, they want to have the entire water system completely recycling itself.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, this is all very exciting and very optimistic, and they test things out. AI being another aspect that they're testing right now. They're deploying AI across, whether it's police or whatever admin bureaucracy entity within the city. They're trying to automate a number of things, and they're very accessible, which is kind of fascinating. And then
And
if
people
you look at
trust the government to do that with AI there, because I think a lot of it is whether or not you trust the people in charge to be making decisions that, to your point, protect privacy and sovereignty and make decisions in a way that are equitable. So overall, and the mood is that, the more AI, the better there, or no?
It seems to be that way, obviously with cautiousness. I don't know the full extent, but they do want to become one of the AI players in the world.
Mm.
So, yeah, I mean, I have to say that is one of the safest places I've ever been. So whatever they're doing, and we can talk about privacy maybe on another occasion, but
There's
it
always
is
the tension.
working in keeping the city safe.
Well, it's always the tension, right? I mean, this goes back to even in, the UK when they were putting clear plastic in trash bags, right? And they
Mhm.
could see everything you threw away, to cameras everywhere in the city to monitor things, right? It's designed to keep you safe. So we're always going to have that the tension between those two things.
Yes,
I think the overall intention around this is the part that I think is so important. Really, what is the intent?
100%. 100%. Totally, totally agree. Yeah.
It is interesting. I'm going to Saudi Arabia in a few weeks to be part of an AI conference there. And the same thing, I think that this portion of the world is very much wanting to become a leader in the world of artificial intelligence, hopefully in the ethical deployment of it and the equitable deployment of it, which is why I want to go there and be part of those conversations, insert my
Fantastic.
perspective on those things, because I think they're really important. I'm actually heading also to Brazil, actually, to speak to 300 women on the feminine perspective on AI and technology, which I think will be really interesting to talk to 300 women there who want to become more informed and more thoughtful technologists. So it just goes back to your point before around diversity, right? The more that we can have people who may not think of themselves as technologists, but really need to be in the work. Brene Brown said something really fascinating at an event a few months ago that Emma and I were at, where it was like the AI people need the people. And people often feel as though this is not their world, but we need the people, whether it's the artist or the HR
100%.
people or the nurses
100%.
or the doctor or whoever it is, right? Who cares for people, teachers in the world of designing these things and not just leave it to the technologists. So
Totally, totally agree.
yeah, I'm encouraged by the broadness of that. So just as we round out the conversation, I know, Emma's always encouraging us to talk more about the design work that you and Ross do. So if you want to stop for a moment and just talk about DEOND and the purpose of sort of what you're creating with that. I know that the extent of the work is broad, but there's a lot of architecture and, to your point, infrastructure design that's a part of the work. Is that where you're most
Yeah,
focused?
absolutely. And I can also connect to what you just said, which is very, very interesting. So, yeah, I mean, it's taking Ross's career work and my background and capabilities basically and form something completely new. But within the same realm, we just want to concentrate more on true innovation and tangible improvement, particularly looking at the urban environment or livability. So design is part of it, architecture is part of it, sustainability, IoT, smart devices, and holistically design all of those together to make cities better for the future. So some of Ross's principles have always been under the umbrella of organic design, but an evolution of organic design, you could argue, is life-centric design. Going back to Ross's practice, anything from dematerialization, so having less but better, that in the engineering term becomes topology optimization, parametric architecture, which is having parameters that control the architecture, so that is structurally better, but also in terms of material quantification, quantity is much better, and therefore engineering and performance becomes better. So all of those aspects. And then it comes the beauty, which is the biomorphism, bio-inspired, biomimicry coming out of nature. So we do believe that cities are going to be better looking in the future, but also better performing. So for us, beauty and logic, they coexist, which is what nature has done for millions of years, right? So yeah, it's learning from those principles and making the built environment within the same approach. Particularly with DEOND, we came to Dubai because Dubai is one of the, I believe, is the only place at the moment that has all sorts of regulations in place to allow for 3D printed architecture to take place. So if you look at, you have US at the moment with Icon, obviously, but
In
is
Austin.
in exactly. But then you have Europe, which is predominantly at an academic lab research level. So you have Holland being a strong player. You have entities like ETH Zurich, a little bit London-based university like the Bartlett and the AA. But those, they tend to push the boundaries of 3D printed architecture, or at least the engineering and the performance optimization within a lab environment. And then you have Dubai and the neighboring countries, a little bit like Saudi, like you mentioned, and even Oman, and a little bit of Asia, where policies are being made to allow 3D printed to take action, being used and deployed for actual building. They're going to be used and have residency and being lived in, basically, which is fascinating and very optimistic. So that's why we came here. Dubai municipality has a strong vision that by 2030, Dubai should have at least 30% of new build being 3D printed.
No way. Oh, wow. And
Yeah,
that's okay. So then we
yeah,
get to the material side of it, right? So then the materials, and
correct.
we've talked about this before as well, right? Are they designed like Icon uses what they call lavacrete, which is designed to withstand tremendous weather, right? So whether it's hurricanes or floods or whatever, they're really designing for the fact that the weather's become more extreme and they want the building to be as secure as
Correct.
possible. And then I look at it and say, well, I want it to be for compostability at some point because I don't know that that building should sit around for hundreds of years if we've had its
Exactly,
use now. I
exactly.
don't know that it'll have its use then. So again, this goes back to tension. So when you talk about materials, it's not just the fact that you are using this technology, but the material science that goes with that, right? Or the material, again, intention of what you're building
Yes,
for.
yes, and it's still a sector that is embryonic stage, if you want, and it feels a little bit like the Silicon Valley in the 80s with computer technology. Similarly, 3D printing and architecture. So you have the technology that comes from a manufacturing perspective. So, for example, you have on-site and off-site, and those are two different sets of machinery. You have the robotic arm, medium and large scale, and then you have the crane system with the extrusion head. And those tend to have slightly different materials. But then you have the material in relation to the extrusion head and the speed at which the extrusion heads pumps the filament out, you would say. And all of those, they kind of offer so much possibilities within their niche. So the robotic arm could be customized, and you could become, yeah, a robotic engineer and just make it better. The extrusion head similarly, and then you can mix your own materials and have so much possibilities within the science of the material itself. So all of those things are aspects that we're looking at. Material
And even the
science,
design, right? You and I've talked about the fact that even so, if I suppose I want to design a house or a multi-dwelling unit, because part of it is I don't know if I want to live alone or I might want to live with other people, and as I age, making the design itself more modular, right? So these pieces
Correct.
by printing and putting together can be then potentially, de whatever the word is, like, deconstructed.
Deconstructed and retrofit. Yeah.
Yeah, and turn into something else. This whole idea that it can take a wall or a piece or whatever, like Legos almost, right? And build a different shape house with the same pieces at some point is really, really fascinating to imagine what architecture becomes.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And then you have the multi-story situation where how can we find new facade systems, for example, that are lighter but better performing. Weather and environmental condition has a lot to do with how we compose materials. So, for example, there's if you take a robotic arm, the most used material is polymer based. So you have polymer pellets, whether it's recycled or new pellets, is mostly polymer plastic based filaments. And those are being tested for architecture, but there's a lot of questioning of whether they resist the weather and they resist durability because, of course, polymer degrades faster than concrete, for example. But thanks to AI, now we know that we can compose and bioengineer polymer together with other materials to make it stronger and more durable. So, for example, now the new polymers, they can resist up to 70 degrees Celsius for a lifespan of 100 years minimum, which is very interesting. But then what happens next, right? What happens if you have mycelium going in or algae or, all sorts of new bio generated materials or Kevlar and comfort fiber? I don't know. It's kind of like getting so exciting. And
It
it's a
is
little bit
really, really
between
exciting.
research and,
Yep.
yeah.
Emma did an interview recently for the series with the co-founder of Earthos, which is doing bioprinted or bio AI generated bioplastic, and but almost like bespoke, like for this particular use case or in this geography, because these are either the elements that are needed or the materials that are available, like so that you don't have to ship these things that sort of mass produced and sent all over. It's like really designed to be specific to the environment that it's in and for the use case that it's in. And again, such early days. I think 0.05% of all plastic right now is produced this way. So the market is huge, and the
Indeed.
ability to bring again, they have their own proprietary AI that they've developed to help work through all the chemical properties of this, which is so again, and it's really fascinating. I'm just going to do the cheer again for these are two young women that are started this when they were 20. They're 28 now. They just got $11 million in funding to be able to move that
Wow.
forward, right? So it's super fun to see people who feel like there's no barrier to entry in this. They see a problem, they see the technology could be a solution, or this again. I think it's not just technology; it's really a whole different design uh,
Mindset. Yeah.
mindset, imperative, just pulling down all of the expectations of what it is that we think about how things should be done or how they have been done in the past, and redesigning and recreating and reimagining all of them.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Yeah,
This is
this
super fascinating. But if you look at nature, it makes complete sense, right?
right,
If you look at geology, for example, there's a reason why mountains in this particular location are made chemically, their composition is that way because they are perfectly evolved for that particular environment. So it makes complete sense for us to start looking at nature. So, for example, here in the UAE, it makes complete sense to use sand and local sand,
right,
for example,
right.
and so on and so forth. So you just adapt and customize and make bespoke solution for any given situation. And this is what 3D printing offer, not just for architecture, but also any kind of infrastructure. So, for example, we're talking with a couple of renewable energy startups on how we can topology optimize their hardware to make sure they're more resilient and better, more efficient in what they do, whether it's a windmill or a solar energy solution. Those are all things that can be 3D printed, not in terms of concrete mixture, but metal 3D printed for a better kind of morphology of the
Right.
parts.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right, right. So, I mean, we could talk for hours, sister, and figure out like someone's probably trying to finish up their walk, and you and I are still like opening new subjects as they're listening to this conversation. But as we sort of round out this one, when you think about your daughter's future, so you have a 3.5-year-old daughter, you've very intentionally named her to be, a part of this safe and thriving future. What is the world that you envision for Ocean that you're helping build? Like how do you want her to walk through life as she's looking around in her built environment in her life?
It's a tough one. No, it's a beautiful question. It's a tough one, and I think it's going to be as long as I live, something that I constantly ask myself. But certainly, I would love her to just being able to collaborate and be participating. This is something that I think it's the best aspiration I could give to my child, but anyone else's child as well, right? Being able to have your own voice and use it, being able to have your own talent and use it, but use it in action, right? And being participating. So I don't know if I think about the architect of the future, say, and when I say architect, I don't mean just building. I think anybody can be an architect, whether you're designing food or you're designing bottles or you're designing roads or music. You are an architect and a mastermind, right? I just hope she's going to be able to have the freedom to collaborate interdisciplinary and bring new solutions and enjoy what she does. And going back to AI and automation, I just hope that that's not going to take away the participation of humans, because this is what makes us passionate about anything, even just the two of us talking. We have passion in doing what we love doing. And I just hope that we're going to have the wisdom to not take that away from ourselves with robotics and just total automation. Going back to what you were saying earlier, actually, I wanted to say that this I learned from Ross, but also I learned from a couple of other theologists, that when you have mono directional optimization, is actually counterproductive to the optimization you're trying to do. So, and there's an Italian theorist that is now talking particularly about this, about AI as such. When you instruct the AI, and as a fictitious example, to go from Milan to Rome, and all of the instruction, the whole instruction is just based on going downwards at speed better towards Rome. What happens is that AI, if it was a vehicle, let's say, is going to keep driving downwards and completely miss Rome, because we haven't instructed enough nuances in the prompting, which was not just going downwards as straight, better, faster, but it was also considering and having spatial awareness and look around and notice where Rome actually was. So the same way optimization that we see at the moment at the table is very monodirectional and is not considering everything else. So I just hope that she's going to live in a world with non-monodirectional optimization, more diversity, and more beauty.
Yeah, there you go. Well, you're doing everything every day to get us there, which I, again, so grateful that we met in Dubai last year, and grateful that I've been able to follow your work and that we get to have so many of these conversations, and I get to see you again in a few months when I come back. And we'll learn more about the Polaris. I did sign up to be, early
Oh, amazing.
recipient of the things you guys are doing with Polaris and the work that comes out of that, and the art that comes out of that. And I just think that this is, again, the conversation. And, we try and put these things into linear boxes. If we're talking to an architect, or we're talking to an artist, or we're talking to a technologist, or we're talking to whatever. But today we get to talk to the future, which I really do believe is who you are, which is the combination of all of these things and the integration of all these things and the optimization in the highest order of all of these things. So thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And as I said last time that we had the brief exchange, you did do a lot for me, and whether it was indirectly or non-directly acknowledged to you, but I'm telling you now, since we met last year in Dubai, you did a lot. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for your support.
You know what we all do for each other, and that is really the big weave. If you look again at nature and how it thrives, it's because we extend, right, our tendrils out to meet others and to connect with each other. And so thank you for taking the time to chat with me today and connect with me. I laugh again that, if we try to have this conversation just over tea, it would have never happened, but over a video so that we can share it with other people, it does.
It's
So
wonderful.
I
Indeed.
know. Thank you. All right, honey, well, take good care, and we will
Thank
see
you
you
so much.
soon.